The whispers reached me before I'd even stepped into the room, and the cruelest one came from my own aunt. Poor thing. 200 guests and no groom. Somebody should just tell her it's over. I was standing in the little anteroom off the main hall at Vintner's Hollow, a restored stone estate outside Niagara-on-the-Lake, that my father had booked 11 months in advance because he wanted the vineyard in the photos. My dress weighed more than I did. The seamstress had laced the back so tight that every breath felt like a negotiation. And now I was using those small, careful breaths to keep from falling apart while the people who claimed to love me debated my humiliation on the other side of a door that didn't close all the way. It was the second Saturday of October. The maples along the property line had gone the color of struck matches, and that morning I'd actually thought, this is the most beautiful day of my life. I'd thought it without irony. I was 31 years old and I believed it. By 2 o'clock, the ceremony was supposed to have started. By 2:30, the officiant had stopped checking his watch and started checking his phone. By 2:45, my fiancé had stopped answering his. His name was Grant, and I'd been with him for 4 years. We met at a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital, the kind of event where everyone wears a name tag and pretends they came for the cause. He was charming in the way that men who've never been told no are charming. Easy, loud, generous with other people's attention. My father liked him because he talked about leveraging equity and called my dad Sir. My mother liked him because he remembered her birthday. I liked him because when he looked at me, I felt chosen, and I was at an age where being chosen had started to feel urgent. I should have noticed how often the word chosen came up in my own head. People who feel secure don't keep score of being picked. My best friend, Imogen, was the one who finally got the truth, and she got it the way you always get the worst news, now, through a phone. She came into the anteroom with her face wrong, holding the screen against her chest like she could put the words back inside it. "Sweetheart," she said, and I knew, when Imogen calls me sweetheart instead of swearing at me, the news is bad. She turned the phone around. It was a story posted 40 minutes earlier. A photo of a boarding gate, a tropical drink, 3 men I recognized as Grant's groomsmen, and Grant himself in the middle with his sunglasses pushed up into his hair, grinning like a kid who'd got away with something. The caption was 4 words, "Plans changed, Punta Cana." He'd flown out of Pearson while I was getting my hair pinned. He hadn't even had the decency to do it quietly. He'd documented it. I remember the room tilting. I remember Imogen's hands on my shoulders. I remember thinking very clearly and very stupidly that I had to call the caterer because the salmon would go to waste. And then the door opened the rest of the way and the noise came in. My father got to me first. He's a big man, a guy who built a successful general contracting business out of one truck and a willingness to outwork everyone. And when he's angry, the whole room knows it. His face was the color of a bruise. He had his phone in his fist. "Where is he?" he said. It wasn't a question. "I will end him." I poured $140,000 into this, the venue, the band, the open bar, your mother's dress, his ring, and that little coward is sipping rum on a beach. I'll see him in court. I'll garnish his wages until he's 80. Dad. I'll call his father right now. I'll call his boss. He posted it, Maeve. He bragged about it. Dad, please. But it was already gone the way these things go. The guests had their phones out. Some were filming. I could see, past my father's shoulder, a cousin holding her camera up at chest height, pretending to text. By Monday, the whole story would be everywhere. Every old high school classmate, every co-worker, every distant relative who'd RSVP'd with regrets and meant the opposite. I could already hear how they'd tell it. Remember Maeve? Left at the altar, in the dress and everything. My mother arrived in a cloud of perfume and ruined mascara, sobbing so hard she could barely stand, gripping me like I was a railing. My baby, my baby. How could he, after everything we did for him? I couldn't breathe. Between the corset and my mother's arms and the heat of 200 bodies, I genuinely could not get air in. The edges of the room started to sparkle and go dim, and I thought, with a kind of detached relief, "Oh good, I'm going to faint, and then I won't have to be here." And then a voice cut across all of it, low and even, and the room went quiet the way a room does when somebody with real authority speaks. My apologies, everyone. The traffic on the QEW was a nightmare. There was a collision near the Garden City Skyway, and they had 2 lanes closed. I came as fast as I could. I knew that voice. I'd heard it in budget meetings and on conference calls and across a drafting table for almost 3 years. It belonged to the man who owned the firm where I worked, the landscape architecture studio in Toronto where I'd gone from junior designer to project lead. His name was Desmond Vance, and he had no earthly reason to be standing in a vineyard in Niagara on the worst afternoon of my life. He was in a charcoal suit, no tie, his hair slightly out of place as though he really had been driving fast. He walked up the center aisle between the white chairs like he'd walked it 100 times, like he belonged at the front of this exact room, and every single guest turned to watch him because that's what people do around men who move with certainty. He came straight to me. He didn't look at my father or my weeping mother or the cousin with the camera. He looked at me, and for the first time in an hour, somebody was looking at me without that awful flicker of pity mixed with pleasure, that thing people can't hide when they're watching a disaster they're not part of. "Mr. Vance," I managed, "I'm so sorry. You shouldn't, this isn't." He leaned down. He smelled like cedar and clean cotton and something underneath that I'd never let myself notice. His mouth was close to my ear, and when he spoke it was for me alone, pitched so low it was almost just breath. "Follow my lead," he said. "Let them think I'm the one you're marrying. He's been gone 2 hours. You don't owe these people your humiliation. Let me give you a way out of this room with your head up, but it's your call. Say the word and I stop." I stared at him. I think my mouth was open. None of it made sense. What he was offering, why he was here, how he'd known where to come. Later I'd learn Imogen had texted half the people in my phone in a panic, and his name had been there because we'd exchanged numbers for a project, and he was the only one who got in his car. "You can't," I whispered. "Everyone here knows what happened." "Everyone here knows what they think happened," he said. "Let's give them a better story. Yes or no, Maeve, I'm not going anywhere either way." Behind him, my father was still bellowing about lawyers. My mother was still crying. The cousin was still filming. And somewhere in the back, an aunt was saying audibly, "Well, what's she going to do, just stand there all day?" I said yes. I don't fully remember deciding. I remember the word leaving my mouth. He straightened, took my hand, laced his fingers through mine like he'd done it every day of his life, and turned to face the room. "Friends," he said, "thank you for your patience. Shall we?" I have replayed the next 20 minutes more times than I can count, and they still don't feel like they happened to me. The officiant, an old friend of Desmond's family it turned out, a retired United Church minister named who'd been hired for the original ceremony, caught on faster than anyone. He stepped up, opened his book, and gave Desmond the smallest nod, a flicker of understanding passing between 2 men who'd clearly known each other a long time. Whatever the legal tangle of it was, and there was one. The license in the drawer had Grant's name on it, not his. The minister handled it the way kind people handle things. He conducted what he called a blessing of intention, words that sounded like a wedding and committed no fraud, with a quiet promise we'd sort the paperwork properly in due course. I didn't understand any of that in the moment. In the moment, I just heard a steady voice telling the room that 2 people had chosen each other, and I held on to the hand of a man I barely knew and let myself be carried. When the minister said the part about sealing it, Desmond looked at me, and there was a question in his face that the words didn't have. I gave the smallest nod. He cupped my jaw with one hand, careful, like I was something that had already been dropped once, and he kissed me. I expected it to feel like a performance, It did not feel like a performance. The room dissolved. The whispering, the cameras, my father's fury, my own grief, all of it pulled back like a tide. And for the length of that kiss, there was nothing but the warmth of his hand and the strange, terrifying rightness of it. When we broke apart, I was lightheaded for an entirely different reason than before, and the guests were on their feet, clapping, some of them whooping, a few of them crying happy tears for a love story that had existed for 90 seconds. "What was that?" I said under the applause, barely moving my lips. "A convincing performance," he said, but his voice wasn't steady, and we both heard it. The reception became the most surreal evening of my life. The band, paid for and present, played as if nothing had changed. Somebody had quietly told the catering manager the groom had been switched, and the staff, professionals to the bone, simply adjusted the place card at the head table and carried on. My father, who 20 minutes earlier had been threatening to garnish wages, stood at the bar gripping a rye and ginger and watching Desmond with an expression I couldn't read. Somewhere between suspicion and the desperate gratitude of a man who just had a catastrophe taken off his hands. Grant's parents had been there at the start. I saw them slip out during the chaos, his mother white-faced and his father not meeting anyone's eye, and I never saw them again. A handful of his friends who hadn't gone to the airport left too, quietly, the way people leave when the host of the disaster is no longer the person they came for. I'd find out later his father called mine that night, ashamed, offering to cover a portion of the costs, and that my father, to his credit, told him it wasn't his debt to pay. Desmond and I had our first dance because the band started it, and there was no way to refuse without explaining. His hand settled at the small of my back. I'd worked alongside this man for almost 3 years, and I'd never once stood this close to him. "Do you actually know how to do this?" I asked, "or are we about to humiliate ourselves all over again?" "My mother made me take lessons before my cousin's wedding when I was 17, he said. "Worst 3 weekends of my adolescence. I have never once been grateful for it until right now." I laughed. A real laugh, surprised out of me, the kind I usually only let out when I think no one's listening. Something flickered across his face when he heard it. "How long do we keep this up?" I asked. "Eventually someone realizes you're not him." "Don't think about that tonight," he said, and turned me under his arm so smoothly that the watching crowd sighed. "Just dance. One song, the rest of it can wait until tomorrow." So I did. I rested my head against his shoulder and I let myself forget, for the length of one song, that 3 hours earlier I'd been waiting for another man. I let myself forget it was all a kindness performed for an audience. I closed my eyes and pretending felt dangerously like relief. The last guest left a little before 11. My father shook Desmond's hand at the door, held it a beat too long, and said something low I didn't catch. My mother hugged me so hard she cracked my back and made me promise to call her in the morning. Imogen pressed my overnight bag into my hands. She'd had the foresight to grab it from the bridal suite and whispered, "He drove an hour and a half to do that for you, just so you know." And then it was quiet, and it was just the two of us in a stone room full of dying candles and the smell of cut flowers, and the reality I'd been out running all day finally caught up. The estate had a suite upstairs, part of the package, decorated for a wedding night that was supposed to belong to someone else. Desmond stood by the window looking out at the dark rows of vines, while I stood frozen by the door, suddenly and acutely aware that I was alone in a room with my boss, in a wedding dress, married, or blessed, or whatever this was, to him in front of 200 people. "I can get a room in town," he said, not turning around. "There's an inn 10 minutes up the road. You shouldn't have to do this part too." "It's the middle of the night and you've already done enough driving," I said. And then, because some stubborn part of me refused to let the day stay ugly, "If the staff sees you leaving, it'll be all over the county by breakfast that the groom bailed on the second bride of the day. We've given everyone enough to talk about." He laughed at that, quietly. "Fair, I'll take the couch." "You're enormous. You won't fit." "I've slept on worse on job sites. I'll be fine." I made him turn around. I needed to see his face for what I had to ask. Why did you do it? And don't tell me it was professional concern or that you felt sorry for me. People don't drive 90 minutes and marry their employee out of concern. He was quiet for a long moment. He ran a hand through his hair, the way I'd seen him do over a problem that wouldn't solve. And when he spoke, he wasn't using his meeting voice anymore. He sounded like a person. Because I couldn't stand in that doorway and watch them take you apart, he said. I got there while your aunt was telling people to send everyone home. I heard them laughing, and then you came out of that room, and you were trying so hard to hold your face together. And I've watched you hold rooms together for 3 years. I've watched you fix things nobody else even sees are broken. And the idea of you carrying this for the rest of your life, blaming yourself for something a coward did, I couldn't. He stopped. It seemed like the only thing that solved everything at once. Your father was about to do something he'd regret. The guests were going to leave with a story, and you were going to spend years apologizing for being left. I couldn't watch it happen. You could have just helped me leave, I said. My voice was breaking, and I hated it. You didn't have to marry me. No, he agreed. I didn't have to. The silence after that said more than either of us was ready to. He crossed the room and handed me a cloth handkerchief from his pocket, an actual cloth handkerchief. Who carries those? Because I'd started to cry without noticing. You've cried enough today, he said gently, for a man who isn't worth a single one of them. We ended up sitting at the little table by the window, eating the room service pasta he'd ordered, while I showered off the day because I hadn't eaten since a slice of toast at 7 that morning and I was shaking from it. He poured 2 glasses of the wine the estate had left chilling. A local Niagara Red, of course it was, and we ate in a silence that should have been unbearable, and somehow wasn't. That kiss, I said finally, because I'm not a person who can leave a thing unsaid once it's lodged in me. That wasn't a performance. He set down his fork. No, he said, it wasn't. You can't just say that. You asked. I work for you. I'm aware. He turned his glass slowly by the stem. Maeve, can I tell you something, and you can do whatever you want with it after? He waited until I nodded. I didn't drive here because you're a good project lead. I've watched you for a long time. The way you talk to the trades on site like they're people, not obstacles. The way you remember everyone's kid's name. That laugh you did downstairs, the one you didn't mean to. I told myself it was nothing, that you were engaged, that I was your employer and it was inappropriate, and I was right about all of that. And then your friend texted me that you were standing in a vineyard while the man you loved posted from an airport, and every single one of those reasons stopped mattering. I was in my car before I'd finished reading it. I didn't know what to do with my hands. This is insane, I said. 12 hours ago, you were my boss. I know. I haven't even processed that grant. I know that too. He sat back, giving me air. And I'm not asking you to process anything tonight. I'm not asking you for anything. You've been through something brutal, and the last thing you need is your boss confessing feelings on the worst day of your year. So here's what I'd like if you'll let me. Tomorrow, when your head's clearer, we figure out the practical parts. The license, the paperwork, what we tell people, whether you'd even want any of this to be real. Tonight, you sleep. I'll take the couch and I'll fit, and that's that. And the feelings, I said, we just file those somewhere. The feelings, he said with a small, tired, completely genuine smile, have waited 3 years. They can survive one more night. I lay awake a long time after the lights went out. I could hear him breathing on the couch, too long for it, exactly as I'd warned. I thought about Grant on a beach 2,000 kilometers away, drunk probably, free of me, and I waited for the wave of grief to take me under. It didn't come the way I expected. What I felt instead, lying in a bed scattered with rose petals meant for another man's wedding night, was something closer to a door swinging open in a house I'd thought had no other rooms. I'd been so busy being chosen by Grant that I'd never once asked whether I'd chosen him. I'd been so afraid of being the woman nobody picked that I'd let myself be picked by a man who, it turned out, would abandon me for a long weekend in the sun without a backward glance. And a man I'd worked beside for 3 years, a man I respected, a man I'd apparently never let myself really look at, had gotten his car the second he heard I was hurting. I'm still healing from the part of me that needed to be chosen. I won't pretend a single night fixed 31 years of it. But that was the night it started to crack. In the morning, my father called before I'd even had coffee. I braced for the lawyers and the rage. Instead, his voice was rough and uncertain, a tone I'd heard from him maybe twice in my life. "That fella," he said, "your boss. Was that real? Or did he just do me a favor and save the day?" I looked across the room. Desmond was at the window again, in a gray t-shirt and track pants he'd had in a gym bag in his trunk, holding 2 coffees from the machine downstairs, watching the mist burn off the vineyard. He looked younger, like that. He looked like a man, not a millionaire, not an employer, just a tired, decent person who'd done a wild thing for the right reasons. "I don't know yet, Dad," I said honestly, "but I think I want to find out." There was a long pause on the line. Then my father, who had never in my hearing apologized for anything, said, "I pushed you toward Grant. I liked the way he talked. I should have looked closer." His voice caught. "You deserve a man who'd cross a city for you, Maeve, not one who'd cross an ocean to get away." I had to put the phone down for a second. We sorted the practical things over the following weeks. The way you sort anything real, slowly, with paperwork, with awkward conversations. The blessing in the vineyard had been exactly that, a blessing, no license behind it, which the minister had quietly insured so that nobody committed anything they couldn't undo. There was no legal marriage to escape, which meant whatever happened next, we both had to actually choose it. I think that's the part that saved us. Nothing trapped us together. We had to keep deciding. The first thing Desmond did when we got back to the city was move me to a different team at the firm, reporting to one of the other partners. "I never want you to wonder if you're with me because of work," he said. "And I never want anyone else to wonder it either. You earned your place here long before I ever drove to Niagara. I'm not going to let this take that from you." He even floated promoting me to the project director role he admitted he'd been sitting on for half a year, so that I'd have my own team and answer to no one's affections. We took it slowly. He'd come to my place, a 1-bedroom in Leslieville I was fiercely proud of, and cook badly and let me laugh at him. I met his mother, who hugged me before he'd finished introducing me and told me, conspiratorially, that her son had mentioned a woman at work named Maeve so often over the past 2 years that she'd assumed I was either married or imaginary. We went up to his family's place near Gravenhurst for Thanksgiving, and I sat on a dock in a borrowed sweater watching the lake go to glass at dusk. And I understood for the first time what it felt like to be somewhere I was simply wanted, with no performance required. Grant, in the end, got the karma the universe doles out so rarely. The video of his airport story had spread further than he'd planned. His employer, a wealth management firm that lived and died on its image, did not love being tagged in a viral post about their advisor ditching his own wedding. He came back from Punta Cana to a suspension and, within the month, no job at all. His friends, the ones in the photo, scattered the way fair weather men do when the weather turns. The last I heard, he'd moved back in with his parents and was telling anyone who'd listen that I'd made the whole thing a bigger deal than it was. I felt, when I heard it, almost nothing. That's its own kind of freedom. 8 months after the vineyard, on a warm evening in June, Desmond proposed, properly this time, on his knees on that same dock at Gravenhurst, with a ring he'd had since April and a speech he was too nervous to deliver cleanly, which is how I knew he meant every word of it. We married in the fall, a year almost to the day after the wedding. That wasn't in front of 40 people instead of 200. My father walked me down the aisle and cried the entire way. The minister from the vineyard performed it, legally this time, and when he got to the part about choosing, Desmond didn't wait for the cue. He said it himself, just to me. Quiet enough that the guests had to lean in. I'm choosing you. I'll spend the rest of my life choosing you on purpose every single day. I think about that word a lot now. Chosen. For so long I wanted it like a verdict, like proof I was enough. It turns out the thing I'd actually been starving for wasn't to be chosen once, in a dramatic gesture, by someone who could leave. It was to be chosen again and again, quietly, by someone who stays. We have a daughter now, and a second one due in the spring. My father spoils them outrageously. My mother has finally stopped crying every time she tells the story, though she still tells it to anyone who'll sit still, and she's added flourishes over the years that I've stopped correcting. Sometimes my husband catches me watching the rain off the back porch with a look he says he can read by now, and he'll come stand beside me without a word, and I'll think about how the worst afternoon of my life was also the day the right man finally walked up the aisle. I went to that vineyard to marry the wrong man, and I left having found the right one, the one who'd been standing a few feet away the whole time waiting, it turned out, for me to be ready to look. And I've never once wished it had gone the way it was supposed to. For years, I treated being chosen like a verdict on whether I was worth anything, and that one belief shaped almost every wrong turn I took. I picked Grant because he made me feel selected, and I mistook the relief of being wanted for the safety of being loved. That's the quiet danger nobody warns you about. When you're starving for proof that you matter, you'll hand that proof to the first person who offers it, even a person who will fly to Punta Cana rather than stand beside you. The thing about cause and effect is that it's rarely dramatic in the moment. Grant didn't abandon me out of nowhere. He abandoned me because I'd spent 4 years not noticing how little he actually showed up, and I'd ignored it because I was more afraid of being alone than of being mistreated. The vineyard didn't break my life. It just revealed what was already cracked. What turned that day around wasn't luck, and I want to be honest about that because I think people watch a story like mine and call it a fairy tale. It wasn't. Desmond got in his car because of who he'd chosen to be over 3 years of small, unglamorous decisions, treating the trades on site like people, remembering names, doing the right thing when no one was watching. When the moment came, he didn't have to summon courage from nowhere. He'd been quietly building it the whole time. Good character isn't a gesture you make once at the altar. It's the sum of 1,000 ordinary mornings, and it shows up exactly when it's tested. I learned that healing took more from me than being rescued ever could. The harder work was after the vineyard, when I had to sit with the part of me that needed to be picked and slowly stop feeding it. It took clear eyes to see that my father pushing me toward Grant and me chasing approval were the same wound passed down a generation. And it took a stubborn kind of grit to keep choosing differently, to move teams at the firm so the relationship couldn't be a crutch, to make us decide each other on purpose instead of staying because paperwork trapped us. If I could tell my younger self anything, it's that you build the life you want by becoming someone, not by being selected by someone. Sharpen your judgment so you can tell a kind person from a charming one. Strengthen your spine so you can walk away from what looks safe but isn't. And guard your decency because in the end, it's the only thing that drives 90 minutes through traffic for someone else. Grant had charm and lost everything. Desmond had character and built a family. That isn't fate. That's just what we each planted, finally coming up. I went to that vineyard to be chosen, and I left understanding I'd have to choose myself first before anyone worth having could choose me back.